This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Not sure I've got to tell you this, but wash your masks or get new ones. Social distance can only go so far when something really smells. Here's what we got for y'all. It looks like the race for a COVID-19 vaccine is inching closer to the finish line. We'll tell you what to know about the time frame from mass production to distribution. Plus, President-elect Biden has promised to approach relations with some world leaders quite a bit differently than President Trump. We'll tell you how a Biden administration could handle foreign policy. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Inmates have been called in to help move the bodies of COVID victims as cases surge in El Paso, Texas. Local authorities say it was to temporarily relieve overworked employees at the county medical examiner's office, but it speaks to just how severe the pandemic has become in parts of the country, including along the southern border. El Paso is reporting roughly 1,000 new cases a day with overflowing hospitals. Further north, 1 in every 1,000 residents in North Dakota has been killed by COVID-19. That marks the highest COVID-19 mortality rate in the world. This is all extremely grim, but it's worth talking about to highlight just how vigilant we have to be right now. More restrictions have been put into place nationwide for mask mandates, but we all need to do our part, like social distancing and adhering to other measures we know can slow the spread.
We are in a critical portion of the pandemic where hospitalizations are beginning to skyrocket again. There are twice as many people in the hospital now as there were in September. We're afraid more deaths will follow.
The Food and Drug Administration approved its first at-home COVID-19 test, with results promised within 30 minutes after testing. But you'll still need a prescription to get it. The Lucira COVID-19 all-in-one test kit is similar to the nose swab you can get at the doctor's office or drive-thru. It's approved for patients ages 14 or older and expected to cost no more than $50. But it won't be widely available until the spring. For now, sales are limited to Florida and California. The Trump administration hopes to achieve one of its longtime goals before time is up, opening up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for oil and gas drilling. For decades, a law protected the wildlife refuge from any drilling, but it was open to potential development by Republicans back in 2017. This week, the Trump administration announced it will begin the formal process of selling leases of the land in Alaska. But opening up the refuge for drilling isn't quite that simple, especially with the timeline they're working with. Even if a deal went through before President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration, the leases would probably never make it to the point of actually being issued. It would likely get pushback from the new administration that has very different priorities.
He'll be against it very soon because his party is totally against it.
Fracking on federal land, I said. No fracking and or oil on federal land.
But it could also be overturned in court. There are currently 4 lawsuits against the Trump administration's actions relating to oil and gas development in the refuge. So if you've been rocking with us this week, you know that there's been some vaccine news from Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech. Their respective vaccine candidates are above 90% efficacy, but they aren't alone, and there's still plenty that needs to happen before a vaccine can be administered. Luckily, Newsy's Lindsay Thies gives us a level set to check where we are exactly in the race for a vaccine.
It's been 9 months since Jennifer Haller, the first COVID vaccine tester, got a shot during Moderna's phase 1 clinical trial. Now, both Moderna and Pfizer's vaccine candidates are at the head of the race, each reportedly working in about 95% of those studied.
That is way more than expected, and it's wonderful news.
Pfizer has said it plans to submit a request for FDA emergency approval in the coming days. Moderna will likely follow in a few weeks, but don't expect the FDA to greenlight any COVID vaccine quickly. Officials have said it will take at the minimum weeks.
The decision will ultimately be determined by the career scientists when we get the data set. This is new for FDA, it's new for the country, new for the world, but all of the candidate vaccines will go through the same process.
The application process is rolling, meaning that vaccine makers have already had to submit things like manufacturing plans and initial analysis. They'll also have to publicly present their findings to an advisory board of medical and science experts. That board provides recommendations to the FDA. It's set to meet next in early December.
What really is happening is this independent process that is looked at by people with no skin in the game, financially or otherwise, I see the data. I get reported the data to me. The FDA sees the data. Soon it will be published where the entire community will see the data.
We're at a point where we're really seeing the promise, where we're seeing that even these new technologies may produce vaccines that are going to help us meet this need, but we're waiting for more data, longer follow-up. And then even as that becomes available, hopefully in the next couple of months, and for other candidates, we also have the issue of having enough vaccine to really make an impact on the pandemic.
Distribution will definitely pose some challenges. Health officials say if a vaccine is approved, vaccinations could start in December, but supply will be limited at first.
Probably the first month or two is really focusing on those high-risk essential workers with a limited supply of maybe 2 vaccines.
Drug makers Novavax, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson are also in the late-stage, large-scale phase 3 clinical trials for their potential COVID vaccines. Not everyone will get the same vaccine if multiples get emergency approvals. Federal health officials say widespread vaccination won't be until April to June of next year. Meanwhile, during the hopeful news, health officials say the best thing we can all do is follow public health advice. Neil Browning, another one of the very first COVID vaccine human testers, put it this way.
I'm taking every precaution that is recommended by every other person. I don't treat this like I'm invulnerable and I'm going to go out and risk it. It's just not worth it.
For Newsy, I'm Lindsay Thies.
The cool thing about this show is that we've plugged in an intermission, or 3. Here's one starting now. At one point, Twitter's tagline was, or is, see what's happening. We'd be rude not to stumble into the fray, right? Here's what's trending. The Boeing 737 MAX is trending after the FAA said the plane can return to rotation. This comes after a 20-month grounding.
During this time, FAA employees diligently worked on the fixes that were necessary to address the known safety issues that played a role in the tragic loss of 346 lives.
You might remember this was the plane that kind of made us all learn how jet airliners work. The Boeing 737 MAX was talked about, dissected, and analyzed ad nauseum after 2 crashes, one in Ethiopia and the other that went down over the Java Sea off the coast of Indonesia. The order is only for domestic flights in the US and for certain airlines, American, United, and Southwest. So far, American has scheduled 737 MAX flights to be airborne by December. After being rescheduled, the 2020 NBA draft is happening tonight. You ain't gonna get any predictions out of me, but we can tell you a few other tidbits about tonight's festivities and what's led up to it. For starters, a few firsts. This draft will be held virtually because of the pandemic, so don't expect any side-by-side pics with Adam Silver and whoever is towering over him. And this is the latest the NBA draft has ever taken place. Think about it, it's November, and I don't remember any NBA draftees having to incorporate anything cold weather related into their drip. This is the first time since 1975 the draft wasn't held in June. And while there have been a few different names mentioned when it comes to top picks, it's really a toss-up. Scouts couldn't really do their thing like usual because of the pandemic, leading to an information deficit when it comes to prospects. The 2020 NBA draft will be available on ESPN starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. If you're struggling with your schedule a bit, I'll help you out here. Watch me first, then catch the draft. You're welcome. It's like the Oscars, but for gaming. Today, the Game Awards announced the 6 nominees for Game of the Year, which is basically the most prestigious award in this $100+ billion industry. Nominees include some mega popular hits, including the samurai open world Ghost of Tsushima.
I trained you to fight with honor. Honor died on the beach.
Along with nominees like the endlessly pleasant Animal Crossing New Horizons and gritty zombie drama The Last of Us Part 2, both of which we've talked about on this show.
I really hope you make it.
Unlike the Oscars, winners are picked from the Game Awards nominees by a blend of professional jury votes and a public online vote. And with movies and gaming colliding and intertwining in a lot of ways, I'm wondering when Meryl Streep gets her first Game Awards nod for Best Performance. You know it's only a matter of time. While the Trump campaign continues to dispute the results of the election with baseless claims, President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris have received congratulatory messages from some foreign leaders. Biden has promised cooperative diplomacy, but how exactly will his administration change foreign policy? Newsy's Ben Shamiso spoke to some experts to get to the bottom of that question.
I wanted really to congratulate you.
America's allies seem eager to start working with President-elect Joe Biden, apparently viewing him as a more reliable partner than President Donald Trump. Where President Trump vowed America first, Biden wants to restore America's leadership in the world. On day one, he says he will rejoin the Paris Climate Accord and the WHO. He's also open to the idea of re-entering the Iran nuclear deal under certain conditions. But diplomacy and rhetoric aside, experts say don't expect the world to change too much under a Biden administration.
There's not much of a mandate for any dramatic changes.
With the pandemic and the economy to tackle at home first, Biden's international agenda may be minimal at first. Even after the pandemic, he will likely avoid major world entanglements.
Biden was part of an administration that got the United States into Libya and now looks at that as a big mistake.
Under a Biden presidency, America's rivals will face a more unified West, ready to impose sanctions and revive diplomacy in unison.
What Biden really differs from Trump is the idea that the United States, with its allies, has a somewhat of a force multiplier.
Some analysts hope Biden's diplomatic approach will lead to arms control deals or other conciliations with countries like Iran and Russia.
I think it'll be refreshing if the Biden government doesn't come in assuming that it has implacable enemies in the world.
However, rising tensions with China are not going away, and Biden's plan to contain China's growing world influence is in line with current policy.
Securing our freedoms from the Chinese Communist Party is the mission of our time.
This summer, you had Secretary of State Pompeo talk about the desire to create an alliance of democracies to balance against China, both in the economic and military sphere. But that echoes a phrase that's been used by members of Biden's campaign.
Thank you very much. It's fantastic.
Biden may also seek to build on President Trump's legacy on North Korea.
I don't think the Biden administration is going to go back to a policy of we can't talk with Kim Jong-un, we can't meet with him, we can't be on the same stage. It's like, no, we can do those things, but we just need to be better at trying to get concrete steps taken by North Korea.
Analysts also expect Biden to carefully build on the momentum of the Arab-Israeli rapprochement in the Middle East. Ben Shamiso, Newsy.
It's getting colder, so if you see tabloid pictures of me doing the show in a Snuggie, just assume it's all true. Not gonna lie, the vaccine news is exciting, but the surge of COVID cases is really throwing some cold water on all that excitement, especially when you think about how these cases are impacting US hospitals. Health officials say they are in desperate need for additional hospital staff.
Right now, many U.S. hospitals look like this. Understaffed medical teams struggling to handle soaring hospitalizations.
We've heard there are some hospitals that have no ICU beds available as of today.
As some hospitals in Chicago, St. Louis, Tulsa, and Salt Lake City run out of ICU beds, health officials say they are in critical need of more staff.
As volume exceeds our capacity to take care of patients, we need more nurses to help our nurses out. We've hired 190 travelers to help our facilities take care of patients.
Doctors and nurses who are putting their own health on the line as COVID cases surge.
Right now, our top priority and concern is our staff.
As hospitals become overwhelmed, many are facing the grim reality of turning patients away.
There may be instances where people who have needs for emergency medical care that won't have a place to go in time. So that's the real concern of an overwhelmed healthcare system.
And with months until projected peaks, it's on track to get much worse before it gets any better.
In contrast to the previous two surges that we've seen with COVID, one in April and the one in the summer, this one truly is nationwide. It's every single part of the country.
We have 9 months worth of data.
There's a lot that's unknown. And of course, the initial and still the overwhelming focus is on severe illness. How do you keep people alive?
James Packard, Newsy, Chicago.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. There, I'll let the audience know where to send their Thanksgiving leftovers. With 2 companies reporting their vaccine candidates are more than 90% effective, it won't be long before those vaccines are approved by the FDA and distributed. But they're only effective if people take the vaccine. One worldwide poll found that 1 in 4 adults are not interested in getting an approved vaccine. National reporter Jessica Perez looks into what's driving vaccine skepticism in the U.S.
We decided to dig deep into why people are skeptical of the vaccine and see what pieces of information might make a difference in affecting their decision as to whether to get it or not.
Jonathan Rothwell, the principal economist at Gallup, says instead of a traditional Gallup poll with multiple choice or open-ended questions, the more than 5,000 people surveyed were broken into groups of 200. Each group was asked different questions, proposing various scenarios and hypotheticals about a vaccine.
Imagine that there's a vaccine that's going to be widely available in either, and then we varied the timing to be the end of this year or the beginning of next year. We also varied whether we disclosed it came after the Food and Drug Administration, did 3 rounds of clinical trials, or we just mentioned it was FDA approved.
People were also asked about how effective a vaccine would need to be and who would have to recommend it in order to take it.
What were some surprising things that you found as a result of this?
I'd say the most surprising thing was that telling people that the Food and Drug Administration approved the vaccine after 3 rounds of clinical trial had a slightly negative, not statistically significant effect relative to just telling them it's FDA approved.
The results also showed African Americans and Hispanics were more skeptical of a COVID-19 vaccine, and that most people wouldn't resume activities like going to the store without a mask, traveling, or sending their kids back to school just because a COVID-19 vaccine was available. Dr. Bali Pulendran, a professor of microbiology and immunology at Stanford University, says news about the high efficacy of 2 different COVID-19 vaccines is extremely positive, but he understands people's hesitations.
It's understandable because this is unprecedented. No one has developed vaccines at such warp speed. But again, it has to be driven by the data. And what the data shows us now is that at least in the short term, you have these vaccines that are in excess of 90% effective and safe.
Dr. Pulendran says just because it took less than a year to develop an effective COVID-19 vaccine doesn't mean corners were cut to get there.
Methods used to make these vaccines have gone through the same high, rigorous standards that have always been used to make any number of other vaccines that have been administered and that have been proven to be safe and effective. So by that I mean they've gone through the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 human trials. Multiple independent bodies have looked at the data.
Gallup hopes scientists, doctors, and politicians will use the results of this poll to help guide their messaging to the general public so that most people will be encouraged to get a COVID-19 vaccine when it becomes available. I'm Jessica Perez reporting.
Video games have had a big year in 2020. Sales are up, new consoles were announced, and at least one politician whose name rhymes with Mo Biden leveraged a gaming platform to reach out to voters ahead of the election. But this next story shows how one man who is a former refugee is using a video game to put players in a position to save some real lives. National reporter Chris Stewart has more.
It wasn't an easy journey for them. Most people were massacred in South Sudan. They were farmers. They were growing crops. Their life was better, It was a journey of life and death. My name is Lual Mail, and I'm from South Sudan. During the journey, as my family was fleeing the war, I was born on the way. They ended up in northern Uganda.
Lual Mayan is proud of where he came from.
I've been in a refugee camp for 22 years of my life. That's where I spent all my childhood, in a refugee camp.
And he's proud of where he's going. He lives in D.C. now, on a mission to chip away at the crisis he and his family escaped that still affects an estimated 79.5 million people.
That's why I'm here to create more opportunities for refugees.
He's accomplishing that goal with video games.
So Junub Game is my company. We're based in DC.
He's the company's CEO and self-taught developer, getting ready to launch a game that's all about peace in every detail, down to its name, Salam.
Salam is an Arabic word that means peace. It's a high-tension video game that put a player in the shoes of a refugee who is playing a country.
In Salam, the goal is to get the character from a war-torn country to a peaceful space safely.
That is going to bring the global communities together, virtually and the reality on the ground.
Mayan is doing something nobody has done before.
You are interacting with a virtual character, and you're also interacting with somebody in a refugee camp.
Teaming up with a nonprofit to give players a hand in helping him change the world.
When you buy food in the game, you're actually buying somebody in a refugee camp food. When you buy water in the game, you're giving them water. That's when you're actually giving some portion of that money to somebody in the refugee camp. And that's why I personally believe that we can use our experiences to create a sustainable future for other people.
Mayan credits one person.
I'm happy that I have somebody like her in my life.
His mother, who in the refugee camp quietly saved for 3 years.
And one day she was like, "Lord, this is $300. You can use it to buy your computer." And that moment just changed my life. No matter what I'm gonna do, it will never overshadow the work that she has done in my life.
Today, Mayan stays focused on addressing the refugee crisis.
People are being displaced because of war. People are being displaced because of climate change.
Focused on a solution.
You can be you as a player and still help people.
And on his goal of giving refugees new opportunity.
And I hope it helps more people to realize that refugees are people. We can be programmers. We can be, we can go to the moon if we want. We can be like anything we want to if we have the opportunity. It's hope.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow for more In the Loop. Same time, same place. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.